It is National Signing Day week here at 24/7 Sports. Alongside National Recruiting Editor Brandon Huffman and Duck Territory Insider Matt Prehm, I am Blair Angulo here to discuss Oregon's 2024 recruiting class, a class that ranks number 5 nationally and number 2 among those new Big Ten schools. And Matt, let's begin with you. A lot to like here with this group, a lot of stars, but who are some top players you'll be keeping your eyes on as they get things rolling there in Eugene?
Yeah, best class in school history, and it starts up front with an area Dan Lanning has focused on, whether it's high school recruiting or portal recruiting, and that's the defensive line edge type players. Elijah Rushing, the highest rated prospect, a 5-star player, will have a path to the field right away, even though they brought in a good haul of that position last season. And then they lose both of their nose tackles, Popo Amavai and Takiti Amani, to graduation. And that opens up a door for an opportunity for a guy like Aiden Breland or Jericho Johnson to arrive on campus and find themselves in the two deep. I don't know if they're going to be starters, but they're two body types that they just don't have a lot of on the roster. So I look to those two guys as well as some guys that can make an impact pretty early for the Oregon Ducks.
I think if you look at what they've done on the defensive line and especially on the front seven, that you see a lot of real talent there for Dan Lanning and Oregon. But you look at the receivers this year. They had a pair of 1,000-yard receivers in the 2023 season. Troy Franklin headed to the NFL this year. So there was an urgency to get more receivers. And if you look at, the potential rookie of the year finalist, he won't win it, but Puka Nacua, Junior Adams recruited him to the University of Washington. Cooper Kupp won the Super Bowl MVP a couple of years ago with the Rams. Junior Adams coaching. So you look at Junior Adams' ability to recruit and develop when he gets to a certain school, it's been very successful. And so you look at their class right now, Jeremiah McClellan, they were able to flip him from Ohio State right before signing day, one of the most explosive playmakers in the country in the 2024 class. When you think Ohio State and you think about their success at the receiver position, they went over and they took a receiver from Ohio State in McClellan to get him to leave the Midwest to come over to the West Coast. Then you also throw in Ryan Pelham out of Long Beach Millikan High School. Another flip. He was committed to USC for a number of months before he flipped to Oregon on signing day. Dylan Gresham out of the Inland Empire, they were able to get him. And then Gatlin Bair, the 5-star receiver, the highest rated player to ever come from the state of Idaho. A one-time Boise State commit, was actually on a visit to Oregon the weekend that Boise State fired Andy Avalos. He ultimately decommitted from the Broncos, narrowed it down to Oregon and Michigan. All signs were pointing to Michigan. Then Jim Harbaugh left for the NFL, but more importantly, for Bear, Ben Herbert, the strength and conditioning coach, followed Harbaugh to Los Angeles. That moved Oregon to the forefront with him. Crystal balls went in for Oregon to land Gatlin Bair. He cited the relationship with Junior Adams as a big reason why the Ducks had always been there in the final two grouping. And Oregon is going to walk away with a player that won't help him until 2026 because he's going to lead to serve his LDS mission, but a 5-star receiver nonetheless.
One of those in a group that includes 17 blue chippers, which means they are 4 stars or better. So Dan Lanning and company, they're getting it done on the recruiting trail. That leaves the room, though, for some potential hidden gems. I know that they love to recruit to the stars and get a lot of star power, instant impact types, but they also do a great job of identifying talent. Huff, who are some guys that you have your eyes on as potential under the radar types for the Ducks?
Well, Blair, a couple of years ago, you covered Jackson Powers Johnson out of Utah. He just won the Remington Award for the best center in college football, headed to the NFL, getting great reviews. But he was lightly, regarded because he was an interior guy. Well, Devin Brooks, he's the number 2 player in the state of Oregon. And, the state of Oregon for high school players has had a little bit of a checkered history with the University of Oregon. They recruit outside the state, and maybe the in-state players don't get the same attraction and the attention that the out-of-state guys do. But Devin Brooks committed to the Ducks back in the spring. He was down to USC, Washington, and Oregon, was set to take visits to USC and to Washington, but canceled those visits, committed to Oregon. He's played tackle for Clackamas High School, but he'll play center when he gets to Eugene and give him the success that Jackson Powers Johnson had at Oregon at center. It wouldn't be a surprise at all to see Devin Brooks follow a very similar arc.
It's hard to find diamonds in the rough with this class because it's so deep. And a guy that maybe gets overlooked because of that is Xavier Sims out of Oklahoma, the state's best player, almost a top 100 recruit. Tony Tuioti, Oregon's defensive line coach, at the Fiesta Bowl, spoke with me about his guys and just raved about his potential. And this is a guy that may normally be the tip of the spear for Oregon's recruiting up the front from the defensive line perspective, because they've done so well, he's fallen down the list. They compare him to Brandon Dorlus, a guy that just competed at the Senior Bowl down in Mobile, Alabama, is going to be an NFL draft pick. They like his ability to play multiple positions along the defensive line. And other guys like Dylan Williams is a linebacker from Long Beach Poly. Kingston Lopa is another prospect Oregon is really high on, as well as a safety prospect. There's a couple guys down the list that could find themselves playing as well, year one for the Ducks.
Those are some players that could potentially develop down the road as well. There are some players there that I know that staff loves, and they have, I think, their sights set on the future. But from an instant impact potential, they also brought in a number of high profile transfers, Matt.
Yeah, it obviously starts with Dylan Gabriel, and that's the easiest pick if we're going to find a guy that's going to make the biggest impact. He plays the position that has the ball in his hands every time at Oklahoma. He will replace Bo Nix. He's a big reason why the expectation for Oregon is a top 5 team, a team that can maybe compete for the national championship in 2024. But it doesn't just start and stop with Dylan Gabriel. They've landed multiple Power 5 starters. 9 of their 11 guys that have signed with Oregon from a transfer portal perspective are starters from their previous schools, and one of those guys that isn't is Dante Moore. So that's a big deal for Oregon as well. Jabbar Muhammad is going to be cornerback number 1 for the Ducks, coming from Washington. Jamari Cardwell from Houston. I talked about the departure of some defensive linemen. That's a guy that's coming in to replace those guys, and he will be a projected starter. And then obviously Evan Stewart gets the task of replacing one of the best receivers, if not the best receiver in school history, Troy Franklin. Evan Stewart comes from Texas A&M and will fill in nicely at that X receiver spot for the Ducks.
Yeah, I mean, they did lose Demetrius Martin, their defensive backs coach, or their corners coach, to Michigan State, his alma mater, but they've got a number of DBs coming in who will be coaching them. It still remains to be seen, but Jabbar Muhammad, Brandon Johnson, both were corners. Jabbar Muhammad, one of the better corners in the Pac-12 this last year and helping Washington to the national championship game. Then you throw in Cam Alexander coming up from UTSA, where Will Stein used to be. You throw in the fact they got, Kobe Savage out of Kansas State at safety. So they're bringing in some instant impact guys as they make that move from the Pac-12 to the Big Ten and finding players that can play in the secondary and be able to play right away. They've done a great job recruiting. They've done a great job developing over the last couple of years. But when you can get some experience help and guys that can come in and be able to play right away that have a number of college starts under their belt, that makes that transition from the Pac-12 to the Big Ten that much more manageable for the Ducks, who are already going to be expected to not just compete for a Big Ten championship, but to potentially be in the expanded playoffs in 2024, helping your secondary in a conference that's got Ohio State and their passing game in the conference. It's got USC and their passing game under Lincoln Riley in their conference. You want to get instant impact players in the secondary.
Huff, once upon a time, you were a co-host of a West Coast recruiting podcast here on this network, and we used to joke about Dan Lanning potentially being from Mars because of his recruiting energy. And if I crack the numbers correctly, and if the math is mathing, there are about 40 minutes extra on Mars in a given day than there are on Earth. So he is recruiting a little bit more than some other coaches. He's keeping talent out west, which is something a lot of these schools in the region have been struggling to do. And now they're headed to the Big Ten. So how does this class, and particularly his recruiting success, play into the dynamics of this team as well as they head into this new conference?
Well, it's a top 5 class, just looking at it from a recruiting standpoint, from the high school ranks. That doesn't even count, with what Gatlin Bear will do to those numbers, should they land him. But it'll give them double-digit states in which they've signed a player from, which is pretty impressive. And as you move your footprint from being a West Coast program to now playing in a Midwest and kind of an Eastern-based conference, you want to be able to recruit nationally. And they were able to go into Washington, D.C., into Alabama, into Missouri, into Oklahoma, Texas, and Maryland, but then also hit those key states out west. They have 10 of their signees come from the state of California. They have the top 3 transfer rank class too. So it's not just the high school ranks they're doing well with, they're doing well in the transfer portal. And so that's the kind of recruiting success that you want to have as you make a transition, but it's also the kind of success you want to have as you compete for potentially national championships down the line. You've got to have top 3 to 5 classes to be a consistent national championship caliber program. Now, it doesn't always guarantee success. Look at College Station these last couple of years, but it certainly doesn't hurt when you can accumulate this kind of talent, both from the high school ranks and from the transfer, and be able to put that all together to have a pretty compelling team on the field in the fall.
When Mario Cristobal was here, he took Oregon to another level of recruiting, and it felt almost impossible for whoever they replaced him with to take it up to another notch. And yet somehow Dan Lanning and his staff have been able to do that. This recruiting class is it's the best class in school history. And it's also the first time ever they've signed back-to-back top 10 recruiting classes. And so to what Huff is talking about of stacking recruiting class on top of a recruiting class at an elite level, Oregon's never been able to do that before. And now for the first time, they've got 2 top 10 recruiting classes in the country back-to-back. They're positioned probably to be in play for that for a third year in 2025. And that's what it's going to take to get to another level for Oregon football, to get over that hump, to become a team that's been close to the playoffs or close to winning a national championship 2 different times, to finally getting to that point and getting over that hump. And Huff's right, from their portal recruiting, it's been unbelievably good. Whether it's going out and finding a different cornerback number 1 every single year under Dan Lanning. First it was Christian Gonzalez, and he went off to be a first-round draft pick. And then it became Kyrie Jackson from Alabama. This past season, he's off to the NFL. And now it looks like it's going to be Jabbar Muhammad. Their ability to locate players and add guys that fill immediate needs right away and then just continually to do it year over year has been pretty impressive. And that's how a program like Oregon is going to have to recruit, because like Huff said earlier, they don't have a strong recruiting base in the state of Oregon and the surrounding areas. They have to go distances to find players. And so to be an elite team like they're wanting to be, they have to own California. They've got to own Washington, but they also have to spread their tentacles out across the country. And they're starting to do that.
Dan Lanning will have to flex that muscle. It's going to be a little bit more challenging to recruit against that success that they've had. I think other elite players will see that depth chart and they'll see, hey, look at all these stars. When am I going to play? Well, that's the job now that Dan Lanning is in an unenviable position to be able to recruit there. Thank you so much, Brandon and Matt. You can catch all their coverage of Oregon football recruiting over at Duck Territory, the Oregon site on the 24/7 Sports Network.